Hey everyone, I'm so excited to share this episode of the Building Thinkers podcast with you. I talked with Jonathan Butterworth, a powerhouse entrepreneur, business leader, and 4 times founder. We had a wonderful conversation focused on one of my 12 favorite problems. How might we use the power of habit to improve? Jonathan began his career in his college dorm, founding the first of his 4 companies, and later honed his skills at a Fortune 200 company, where he led high-performance teams and streamlined operations for digital content and digital wealth management organizations. He's the founder of Systematic Labs, a platform dedicated to empowering startup founders and business leaders through innovative learning and strategic leadership. His mission is specifically to transform entrepreneurs and business executives into impactful leaders, utilizing his unique dual experience in both entrepreneurial and corporate realms. And we dig into all that experience as he shares his insights on the power of habit with us. Without any further ado, here's my conversation with Jonathan Butterworth. All right, welcome to the Building Thinkers podcast. Today I'm joined by
Jonathan Butterworth.
Wonderful. Jonathan, I'm so glad you're joining today. Today, we're going to zoom in on how might we use the power of habit to improve. This is, of course, one of my 12 favorite problems written in the form of a question. Oh, this one I really just can't wait to dig into. There's so much power and research, and I'm so excited to get your point of view, Jonathan, on this topic. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tracy. I'm excited too.
All right, let's get a little bit of your story. I will, of course, everyone will have heard an intro where I share a little bit more, but I would love to hear you tell, what is it that you build, and really how did you get to what you're doing now? Whatever way you want to get there, your backstory that brought you to this time.
So very simply put, I'll say I build people. I help people be the best they can be, particularly leaders. But the thing about leaders is one of their main jobs, main priorities is building people. And so trying to teach leaders how to create high-performing teams and, whether someone wants to become a leader or not, build those people up and help them meet their goals. Habits are definitely a big part of that.
I love it. Will you tell us too, Jonathan, a little bit about, so you say 4-time founder. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. What kind of like that entrepreneurial spirit that had you coming back for more of entrepreneurship, it sounds like?
Yeah. So I've done more business ventures than 4, but four main ones. The first actually started in college. So it was in my college dorm room. And freshman year, I needed to make some money to go out to eat with my friends because I was doing a lot of that my freshman year. And I didn't want to get a job. I mean, I don't know how your college years were, especially freshman year, but it's an exciting time, like you're meeting new people, you're doing all kinds of things. There's so many events going on, right? So having a job is a drag in college.
So, I played D1 lacrosse my freshman year of college, so I had a different job. There was not much of anything else.
That is a job. That is a job too. Exactly. Yeah. So I thought like, well, what can I do to avoid getting a job? And I'd been doing web development since I was in middle school, and this was in the year 2000. And the reason that's important is because it kind of sets it provides context to what the world was like, right? So small businesses having a website was pretty rare. And so I just got a phone book and started calling local businesses. And I would pick like an industry, like maybe a plumber. So I'd call plumbers or I'd call screen printers or whatever. And, these websites were super simple. A couple pages, mainly an about me or about us, contact information. And so I started doing that. So I started just building sites. I was charging almost nothing. Didn't know what I should be charging, but it was enough for, a freshman kid to go hang with his friends. But what I realized is I was spending more time prospecting, looking for business than actually building sites. And that wasn't fun. So I realized that for each one of these sites, I had to set up a hosting account so that all the files that make up the website could be stored somewhere.
Mm.
And that's an expense they continue to pay, a
Mhm.
monthly fee, or they may pay annually. So I thought, well, that's what I should do. I should host these websites on my own, and then they can continue to pay me after I built the website, because they usually didn't need anything after
Right.
the site was made. And so I had an old computer from high school, and I turned it into a server.
Oh, cool.
And I mean, you can imagine how slow it was, but back then it didn't matter. And I ultimately ended up getting a server in a data center, so that it was more reliable. So that was my first business.
Wow.
As far as the four goes, the other is another web development company later on, many years later, and then a real estate marketing company. And so our clients were real estate agents, helping them market their properties. So it was a little bit different spin on how most people were doing it, and that included a web app, but also Android and iPhone app that they could use. And then number 4 is what I'm doing today.
That is so awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'd love to also get into a little bit of, you have this entrepreneurial side and you also have corporate experience. And so that unique combination is something I think that brings you to what we'll talk about, your current work. Can you talk a little bit about what you maybe learned there and what kind of lens you have from that experience?
Yeah. So the corporate world is totally different. And, especially from the entrepreneurial experiences I had. I mean, it was small. It was me, maybe a few other people in a lot of these businesses that I started. So there's a lot more really good things to learn in the corporate environment. And I was 9 years is where I spent, is how much time I spent the last company I was at. And it was a Fortune 500 company. So just so much for me to learn there. And I started off, fairly low at the company, and was able to work my way up and really learn what it meant to be, a leader, what it meant to, build teams. And one of my later responsibilities was operations, how to really think about operations and all that's entailed in that, risk management, stuff like that. So my corporate experience was just so impactful to how I think about stuff and how I take the learnings away from that and apply them to my current entrepreneurial experience. And honestly, even to life in general, there's a lot of things I learned that I was able to apply just to my personal life.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go into the habit side of things. And whether you want to start with life more generally, personally, what is it, let's go this direction. If only people knew, when it comes to habits, how would you finish that sentence stem?
Well, here's how I think about habits, and we can talk more about this in detail, kind of my mindset around it. But I think habits are basically a way to automate behavior, and I'm obsessed with automation and creating systems, and that's throughout, for things more personally as well as like physical things in my life too, figuring out how to automate stuff. And so that's how I think about habits. And I can go into what I think actually is one of the most important first steps before you implement a habit to make sure it's successful in doing what you intend it to do. But simply, it's automating behavior.
Oh, I love that. Okay, well, now I want to know more. Now I need to know about the first step. Tell me about that.
Well, so I think, and I think we learn this. All of us probably learn this in some way. We may not realize it, but when you set out to implement a new habit, there's some reason that you're deciding to do it, right? You've decided this is an important thing. I think where we get it wrong, and where I've gotten it wrong many times, is we don't ultimately understand why that specific habit matters to us. And I think a great example is, with health and like fitness and eating habits, right? A common goal people have is to lose weight, right? And so we implement certain habits to lose weight. And a lot of times we don't stick with those habits. And the reason I think for this particular example is because we're not actually thinking about what we're trying to accomplish. Our goal is not to lose weight. Our goal is something different. Losing weight is part of reaching the goal that we're trying to achieve. So it could be different for different people. It may be that you want to look a certain way. You have a very clear idea of how you look. But weight isn't always a very good indicator of whether you're on track or not. Because if you're lifting weights and eating healthy, you could be losing fat, but gaining muscle mass, and your weight stays the same, or you might get heavier. Yeah. So it can get real discouraging if your goal is to lose weight and you've implemented these habits and you're not seeing that happen. So I think it's important to step back and ask yourself, what is the outcome that I'm trying to achieve? And it's not as easy as sitting down for 5 minutes and thinking about it. Like, I think you really need to think through it and understand it for yourself, because sometimes you have to really dig deep to understand, there's maybe some emotional connections to it. And that this could be even for like starting a company. Like, why do you want to start a company? Like, what is that driver? What is that thing that you're trying to achieve? And so really figuring that out. Once you know that, before you implement any habits, you need to understand, and first of all, what are the sacrifices that I'm going to have to make to achieve that? So if it's, a fitness goal, you're going to have to change how you eat. There's a lot of sacrifices there. You're going to have to go to the gym potentially. You might be, if you're training for a marathon, you might be running a lot. So figuring out what are all those things that I'm going to have to do that are going to be sacrifices for me, and am I willing to take those? Am I willing to do those things and sacrifice certain things that, like comforts that I want to achieve this goal? And a lot of times the answer is going to be no. If I want to look a certain way, I want to be fit, I want to be thin looking, I want to be muscular, whatever it is. But I realize I don't really care that much. That's an external pressure that's being put on to me by my society. And ultimately, I don't care. So I'm not willing to make these sacrifices to do it. So those are things you might realize. And so then all those habits, you realize, well, it's not worth pursuing them because I'm not going to stick to them. Unless you have really extreme discipline, then maybe you can. But I think that discipline would be backed up by a very strong desire to make the sacrifices in the first place.
Jonathan, I think this makes so much sense. It makes me think a lot about the work that I end up doing around human potential and learning and growth. And I personally as well am pretty obsessed with habits, with automation, and with have also kind of, I guess, stumbled into the value that you're sharing here of the introspection, the internal work that needs to really precede goals and habits. I'm going to lump goals in there too. The things that we decide to set out to do, especially when, to your point, they take some effort, that they're not just going to be, if it was a habit that was just really easy to establish, we would already have it, we would already be doing that. But if it's something new where we recognize we want a shift in behavior, I kind of like to think about, okay, what are we shifting from? What were we doing previously? There's already some sort of habit loop that's probably occurring there, whether it is that we, if we stay going with the exercise and fitness analogy, we may snooze instead of get up and put our running shoes on. And in shifting that habit really does start with this pause and reflection. It sounds like in a piece of your story, this started with marathon training. Is that right? Is that where you got kind of the bug of recognizing almost like the systems that were underneath? Do you want to speak at all to that and how you got that aha?
Yeah, and I'll start by kind of telling you about my mindset prior to that. And like you said, we all have habits already that we may not even realize. But at the time, I didn't realize that, right? And one of the things I took pride in was uncertainty. I loved going with the flow.
Okay.
I loved living a life where
with no
I
job.
didn't know what to. Yeah, exactly. And even after college, I traveled around and I was bouncing from place to place, and it was exciting, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But I didn't have any clear intention on where I was going, and I took a lot of pride in that. Like, I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. This is amazing. This is very exciting, and I still feel that way in some cases. Like when I travel, I love not having a plan or having very few and seeing what happens. But that was kind of my mindset more broadly across my life, you know. And yeah, marathon training was definitely, I decided I wanted to run a marathon. And it was the drive for me to do that was really just the accomplishment. I just really wanted to do it. And I was willing to do what I needed to do to complete a marathon. And, you know, like if you've ever run or done any sort of races, you get online, you start looking about like, what are my training plans? How do I work up to it? And things like that. So I quickly realized like, I need a very crystal clear plan, you know, so from today until that marathon that I've planned to sign up for, here are the steps I need to take. And here are the things that I need to put in place to make sure that happens. And so that was kind of the aha moment for me, really after I started training, because I did multiple races leading up to the marathon. It was like like you did a 5K, you did a 10K, a 10 miler, a half marathon, a 20 miler, another half marathon, and then ultimately the marathon. And so you really start to understand the power of this consistency of doing things a certain way over time. And that's kind of when everything changed for me, because then I was able to take that and apply it to other areas of my life.
Yeah, it's making me think about in Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, where he unpacks some of the research behind habits. And he talks about the domino effect of a keystone habit and how that shifts usually many others. And a lot of times it is physical fitness or changing the way you eat. And then you might make choices if you're wanting to cut back on alcohol that go along with that, or if you're wanting to be healthy in other ways, that they tend to be interconnected. And it sounds like that's a piece of what happened. But the other part that I'm seeing here is understanding the systems. It's like you almost had new eyes, if you will, to see the power behind it, of that you could translate it and bring it over into these other areas. I feel like I've seen that to be true as well. I won't tell you my whole life story, but I have kind of like a pattern of discipline that I think comes from a really intense college preparatory school from kindergarten through 12th grade. And so it was just very much ingrained. And I've had to actually do a little bit of work to unprogram some of that, to also be okay with some of the serendipity that you're discussing. And so maybe I have a question around that actually, because I'll externally process this. So I do, spend a lot of time in habits and in helping others, activate their full potential. And I'm so inspired by the growth that I see there, both with individuals that I've worked with and also my clients, where I'm doing that more broadly. And there's like this conversation around, the hustle culture, and also, everything we've been through in the last several years. And so how do you see, I don't know if I want to use the word balance, because I think sometimes that's misunderstood, but that's what I'm after here, of how do you now see maybe like a holistic lens of habits and discipline and the time to rest and recover, or do you see rest and recovery as a part of the habit loop that you've established?
I think it's about knowing what you want. I think it goes back to understanding what outcomes you're driving towards. And one of the main things that we need to think about is our life, our whole life, so we can hone in on a specific thing, like training for, a marathon or building a business. But like, we also need to, broaden that perspective and understand, like, what is the life that I want to be living? What do I want it to look like? How do I want to spend time with my family? What kind of traveling do I want to do? And so I think um, I would want to shy away from the word balance too, but like there is a balance between all of
Mm-hmm.
that. And I don't, like we say, work-life balance is
Mm-hmm.
more than that,
Yeah.
right? There's so much that we have to balance. And it's really understanding what our priorities are
Mm-hmm.
and how they stack up and how they change over time. So if you're building your business and you're at a certain stage in your business, it's going to be a higher priority.
Mm-hmm.
And you may be hustling, right? You may be working really hard for 6 months or for a year, but that that's temporary because big picture, you have other priorities too.
Right.
And so I think there's kind of the like, how do we, kind of just move through life very normally, and maybe we understand what that looks like from a balance standpoint, but then also understanding when those times come up where I need to hustle because I'm starting a business or growing my business, or I need to hustle because I'm training for a marathon, or I'm a guitar player and I've got a concert coming up and I need to hustle and really, feel comfortable with my ability to play this music. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the way I think about it. Um, and then when you're not in that hustle state, you should feel more relaxed, and you should know for yourself that like, this is my time to settle a little bit and figure out how to automate, whether it's through our
Ooh.
habits or whatever, to keep things moving, to keep our
Mm-hmm.
business going, to keep our if we're training still. Maybe we don't have a race coming up, but we want to stay fit for running. You know, we keep
Mm.
some sort of regiment in place, um, and you know, and that creates that balance for us.
Yeah. Yeah, that resonates with how I've been thinking about this as well. I see it as seasons, to your point of like seasons to hustle and go. And when I was starting the podcast, when I was starting some new client outreach into different spaces than I'd been in, there was a lot of hustle. And it gets extra tricky for me because I also love my work. And so even when there are the periods of um, maybe lots of it because it's enjoyable, because it feels fulfilling to me, I do have to pause and step back. And I think to your point about in different time periods, you mentioned, as you're starting a business or at these different moments, stepping back and figuring out, is this what I want? Are these things still the priority? And am I making the trade-offs that I want to make based on that? An area that I've also seen this is I end up in a lot of client projects that are around this potential building, or even some where we're calling it dreaming or visioning, where we're thinking, helping employees in companies think about their future of their career within the organization or beyond the organization and things like that. I end up in this role. But in those, I am often struck by how few times, people are actually asked to think openly about not just the work side, but the other parameters of life, of family and relationships and health and all these things that we know contribute to how our employees are doing at work. But they seem to still be siloed when it comes to training and development. And I'm wondering if you've seen that too, both maybe on the entrepreneurial side and also in the company side.
100%. So I've coached a lot of people in building their careers, and one of the things that struck me early on is that people don't really know why they're saying they want what they want. So an example would be, you're in a corporate environment, and the next step for you is to move into people management. And so someone's saying, I want to move into management. You're like, okay, why do you want to move into management? Because the answer to that could take you on a number of different paths, right? Like, you could want to move into management because you have a passion for people and for, leading teams, and you have a passion for building something. It could be because of money, because I want to make more money. It could be because that's the only path I know that exists for me. So talking through a lot of those different things will start to bring up new questions. Like, let's say it's for a lot of people, it's money, right? Like, I want to make more money, and that's the next step to make more money. So then the question is, can you make more money on a different path? And if the answer is maybe or yes, then it kind of throws out the door this desire to be a people manager only.
Mm.
You may be able to accomplish it some other way. And a lot of people don't really want to be people managers. They just don't.
People
And
are
that's fine.
hard.
Yeah. It's a whole different skill set.
Mhm.
And especially if you're good at what you're doing
Mhm.
and you love what you're doing, you're going to probably have to stop doing a lot of that stuff if you move into people management.
Right.
And so I think a lot of it's just asking those questions,
Mhm.
right? And like you said, there's so much more to it.
Mhm.
Like when you think about your career than the money or moving up in a corporate environment. There's also, zooming out, like I said earlier,
Mhm.
and looking at your whole life.
Right.
How do you feel? What kind of team do you want to be on? What kind of people do you want to be around? What kind of work do you want to do? Um, do you feel healthy? Do you feel like the diet that you're eating is making you feel energized? There's a lot of things to consider um, when you're thinking about what your goals are.
Mm.
One of the things I'll say, and this is what I learned for myself and really try to teach others, is look more than a year out. Like if you could look 5 years out, that'd be great. If you could look further, fine. But like look at least 5 years out for your career. And this could be if it's not career related as well. And really try to visualize and understand what you want.
Mm.
And it may be blurry. You may not have a super clear, but get as clear as you can. And then work backwards from that. Backwards all the way, I would say, to the next month or even the next quarter.
Hmm.
And then set yourself goals, very specific goals in the short term, but knowing what that long-term goal is, that long-term outcome that you're trying to achieve. And like you said earlier, we all go through seasons. You can predict some of those seasons you might go through if you look that far out.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also don't get, you don't overdo it. You don't hustle too hard because okay, my goal for this quarter is to do this.
Mm-hmm.
If I do more, that's awesome, but I don't need to do more. I've already decided
Mm.
that this is how much I'm going to hustle. And then you can decide that every next quarter. Did I accomplish what I set out to? Did I learn anything? Maybe I was focusing on the wrong things. Do I need to make any adjustments? And then reset some new short-term goals to continue down your path.
Hmm. Yeah, thanks for making it so tangible there. You helped me realize that I have created my own habit around that, and I use a calendar, like a desk calendar, physical one. Of course, I have my digital one with all my meetings and whatnot, but this physical large one that I'm like looking at over here, the week before the next month starts, I look through all my client projects, all my goals, all my, things that I'm working on, and I do map out what I'll accomplish this month. Some are already set on the calendar. We're doing this training on this date, or we have this set of meetings or whatnot, or this client report that's due. But other things, I'm looking at the margin of this month and I'm saying I'll record X podcast episodes for the year to come, or have these conversations with people, or look into a new conference I want to present at and do some research on what types of presentations might be interesting there. And then also, as I have matured and recognized areas of my life that I in the past didn't pay as much attention to, like play or, exploration or other things, because I was getting some of that within my work, I realized I needed to also have more outlet for that. And so I'll put specific play and family time and specific things we're going to do as a family together on the calendar too, so that they don't get the last little bit of margin, that it is intentional and aligned to my values of how I want to spend my time. That's an area that helps me, and I kind of color code it by those different areas so I can get a quick lens, on that.
Yeah, I do something similar. I have categories.
Mm-hmm.
So they usually always stay the same
Mm-hmm.
year after year. And so there's, your career category, which could include business or whatever. There's a health category. There's what I call relationships, but that would include your family. That would include friendships. There's health, and then there's adventure.
Oh, I love this. This is very aligned to my categories.
So it's fun. And, you don't always have like in a given, month or whatever, something that you're really hardcore trying to achieve in every one of those categories. Like you said, there might be a season where you really want to like hone in on one or maybe a couple. But I try to outline something for the year, every year for all of those, just so I'm not neglecting them, because I think they're all important and I don't want to neglect them. And maybe not for the whole year, but for a lot of times you're just trying to sustain what you've built. Like let's say for adventure, like I've been getting into hiking. So like if you're being really consistent with getting out in nature and hiking around, maybe you understand like, okay, I'm not going to go hardcore and like try to go on all these trips and find really fun trails, but I want to keep hiking, a couple times a month so that I don't lose that. And so that may be something you decide.
It sounds like there's this establishing time period when you're establishing a habit, and then there's maintenance of existing habits. I found a lot of my, workout routine and things like that were habits established pretty early on. And I am pretty consistent with that, with some exceptions. But then other things have been harder to establish, have taken more time to really think through this process of. It sounds like we do something kind of similar. Like I like to look at the end of the year, reflect, look back. I have this whole goal guide I created this year where I put that all into a PDF. I'll put the link in the episode if anybody wants that. But then along those categories, I do have very specific goals. And then this year I realized that the way that habits and goals came together in my mind was the goals were very specific, but the habits were all upholding those goals. If I continue on with these habits, and if I establish a couple new ones here, then I knew I could meet the goals that I was setting. And so I'm curious to your thoughts about how do you think about the intersection of goals and habits? If you have an example of any habits you're working on now that you want to share, we could think through that.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to automating behavior. Right? Like when you first set out to implement a habit, it's not a habit, right? It's dedication. It's consistently, intentionally doing something, over and over and over again. You're trying to establish that automation. You're trying to get to the point where it isn't a thought that you have to think about anymore. I think the example for me is the way I eat. I've played around with it a lot over many years and for different reasons. Right now, for me, I want to eat healthy. And it's hard to do that when you're just going into your pantry and figuring out what to eat for lunch, right? There's so many choices. You've got to consider what's easy for now. Like maybe you're busy, you just have a few minutes that you want to eat something. And so what do? You just grab something pre-made that's not that healthy for you, or you don't eat. You wait, So one of the things that I've been working on is creating a system around how I eat. And so I started with breakfast. And for me, like it was just eating the exact same thing. So finding something that I like, finding something that's the, balance of different macros that I want to get in the morning, and just eating that same thing every day, no matter what. And then making it easy to eat. So I don't have to prepare this big thing. I can do it super easily. And that takes time. It takes coordination with your, significant other, and, like grocery shopping and, making sure you have the stuff and making sure other people aren't eating it. You know what I mean? But then moving on to other meals. So then lunch, dinner's different. And that's something more collaborative with, other people in the house to figure out. Yeah. But breakfast and lunch for me, I can create a system around that. And so for lunch, I can have 5 variations of meals and, but know what I'm going to eat every day. And so it's super hard at first. You have to think, you have to figure it out. You have to figure out what you like, figure out what's going to be healthy for you. But over time, it starts becoming easy. And over time, you don't think about it anymore. And so that's kind of that journey from discipline, putting a lot of effort and thought into it, to not thinking about it at all, and it's all of a sudden automated. And now my behavior at lunch is still a little rough, but with breakfast, I don't think about it at all. And that was my goal. So that's an example.
Yeah. It's making me think about user experience design. Stick with me for a minute. But I think about how we try user experience design to reduce friction, to make it, don't make me think, as easy as possible. And I think it's that same principle at play here. We really do get to a habit, and there's some aligned language around culture. When you have a culture where people just naturally do whatever that thing you want to happen without thinking about it, then you've really arrived at a culture. I think similar with habits, when you aren't thinking about it anymore. So one of the ways that we can adjust and work on our habits is by either adding friction to the things that we don't want to be doing. This is the like put your phone in the other room or lock it up. I've seen all sorts of things around that. Or put closer in the front part of your refrigerator the green juice or something, and put like the alcohol to the back, or like make it harder, if you're trying to adjust those things. And so I see some overlap there. And next, I would love to talk about focus. I think this is an area where we're living in a time, obviously, with a wealth of information and a poverty of attention. And I read Indistractable by Nir Eel. And I think this is just an area that people, when it comes to habits, we have some pretty, we'll just say, addictive habits with our phone and with social media and with just being connected. And so in this area of habits, do you have any thoughts around how you think about focus and how we can gain some of that back, or anything you've been trying to do in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to understanding what's important to you. And, there's always going to be those things that distract us. Social media, our phone is definitely one of them. Netflix, stuff like that, right? Like a lot of evenings, my wife and I sit and watch TV for a couple hours, so, but we've talked about like, is this ultimately what we want to do? Like, do we like watching all of these shows that we watch? We also like talking to each other, so I think it's about asking those questions. What's best for me and what I wanted my life to look like. Something that you said that I thought was really good is whenever we're thinking about making a change, I think one of the first things, especially when you're implementing any sort of system, is asking what needs to be eliminated. And I think from a focus standpoint, there are things that can be eliminated. And so really identifying what those are, eliminated, or taking steps to really reduce the ease to do certain things. The phone in another room is an example. Deleting apps off your phone, setting guidelines for yourself around, when you're on your computer, like if it's a work thing, like if you keep getting pulled into work, maybe you say, I don't get on, and in the morning until 7:30. Before that, it's relaxed time. It's having a cup of coffee. It's talking to my family, whatever. And then of course in the evening, maybe phones get put in the rooms and we're not checking messages and stuff. So, but ultimately I think it comes back to what's important to us, right? Like I think a lot of us know when we have an issue and we think about it. We think, why am I doing this? Why am I scrolling through Instagram for 30 minutes every night? Why am I laying in bed doing that? And we know it. And I think it's just a matter of like stepping back and asking ourselves, do I really want to continue doing this? And what can I start doing to make an improvement? What can I eliminate? What can I change to regain some of that focus that's more important to me than focusing on my phone?
So now I want to go one step further into like this example within focus. And I think this, we'll just kind of play out this thought experiment. I know that you share incredible stuff on LinkedIn. You're a wonderful resource to follow. We'll make sure we put Jonathan's link down in the episode description. You're making really powerful content that people are sharing and resharing. So, as with the same idea of focus, how do you think about that time and that creation? Have you found yourself, for example, getting caught in the loop of checking LinkedIn or checking, because now it becomes its own kind of dopamine hit?
100%.
Safe place.
So yeah, I mean, I go through periods, so LinkedIn specifically, because I put a lot of effort into it. And when I started off, I didn't really know why I was doing what I was doing. I didn't have a clear idea of like the reason behind it, or even what my strategy was. And when you go into something like that, so my original goal was to start creating a personal brand because I didn't have one. But that's such a vague goal, right? Like, why do I want it? And so, but I went into it that way. And you start, doing things, building up these routines and habits. And over a month or a couple of months, you realize like, this is not feeling good. It could be the massive amount of time you spend creating content. It could be the time you spend commenting on other people's stuff. And so for me, it was asking a question of like, what systems can I put in place to make some of this easier? And whenever I think about creating a system, like we talked about earlier, it always starts with what can I eliminate? So if I'm trying to achieve a specific goal with posting on LinkedIn, let's say there's a number of different reasons you might do it, but like, let's say it's growing your followers. Asking the question, is this thing that I'm doing today moving the needle on my follower growth? If it is it significant? If it's not significant, then maybe you can eliminate it, because there's going to be a greater benefit elsewhere for you, maybe like your sanity.
Yeah.
So,
and do you know that when you, like, let's say you're creating something, how do you know when you're working on something if it is going to move the needle or not? Is part of it experimentation to see, or are you thinking about like specific types of content or specific types of behaviors that you would do online where we know some information about? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So it's a lot of testing.
Yeah.
And testing in so many different ways. So there's testing on the actual subject matter of your content. There's the presentation of it. What is it? Is it a carousel, or what is it? A video? Is it just plain text? Is it an image? There's also strategy around how are you engaging with other people after you post that content. Are you DMing people? Are you commenting on their stuff? And so there's a lot of testing that goes into figuring out like, is this piece of content doing what I expected it would do based on the behaviors, the activities I'm taking after posting it? And so, yeah, so over time you learn like this is working, this isn't, but it doesn't mean that it won't work 2 months from now. So you're constantly kind of coming back and testing new things. But for me, because the biggest time commitment is the content creation and the engaging that you do after you post. You have to really figure out what your routine is going to be and how that's going to be good for you. And understanding when it's just, sometimes you just got to push through it. Yeah. Sometimes it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard regardless. And so you've got to understand like how hard is okay for me to do for this. And your goals are going to change. When you start off, it might be growing a follower count. Later, it might be, am I getting business? And so the things that you're doing are going to change based on what your hopeful outcome is from the content that you post.
You're making me recognize I'm much better at one part of that than the other. Like the content creation and putting it out there, great. But then I'm like, okay, peace out, bye. Like I'm turning it off and I don't go back in that area. But that's really helpful to think about.
Yeah. And I'll say like, engagement is a big part of it, whether it's on your own post or on other people's. And that's not easy. It takes time, especially if you want to be thoughtful. But I think one of the greatest benefits from the engagement is the relationships that you make. So not seeing that engagement is only
Mm-hmm.
helping my post get traction, but also building valuable and strong relationships
Yeah.
with other people.
I mean, those are real
And so
people out there. I mean,
those are
except for
real
the
people.
robots.
Exactly. Yeah. So just, something that, that I've considered
Yeah.
when especially when I think like this is hard.
Mm-hmm.
This is a lot of time I'm spending. I just remember, but all the great people I've met
Yeah.
and continue to meet. And so it's still important to me.
I think I've seen that to really be true. My perception of LinkedIn has changed so drastically in the last couple of years. And then when I see people bashing on LinkedIn, I feel like I want to stand up for it. I'm like, you just haven't met the right people yet. The people are incredible. It's just
Mhm.
stop following the people. If it's not content that you want to be engaging with, unfollow. There's a very nice
Mhm.
button there. And the algorithm can really be, to your advantage once you understand and are looking for things that are aligned to your growth and the people you want to be connected with. And I think there's so much. I've found a really generous, incredible community on LinkedIn of people who are truly my friends now, where I've now met them in person, or if I'm traveling in this area, I might go out of my way to see somebody I met. It's amazing.
Mhm. It is amazing. Yeah, same.
Yeah. Jonathan, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your new company, the things that you're doing there, maybe share a little bit with us, and then we can go into some of your recommendations and things like that.
Yeah. So I'll kind of tell you the reason behind why I started uh, pursuing this idea of starting this company. Um, when I was starting my own businesses and things like that, it really really wasn't a lot of what I felt like leadership involved in that. I did have certain leadership behaviors, but um, it was building something. It was
Mm.
building a product, and I loved that. And then when I got into the corporate world and did become a people leader and realized the shift in like the skill set,
Mm.
and there's a lot of emotional intelligence that
Mm.
you have to think about. You have to think about your team. It's almost like, how do I make sure that these people not only feel really engaged and excited about the work we're doing, but also feel very empowered
Mm.
to share their ideas and pursue the things that they want to pursue. Like there's just so much
Mhm.
to it. And I realized that over time, I got pretty good at it. and I really enjoyed it.
Mm.
But as I was coaching other people that wanted to move into leadership positions, I realized, and I remembered this for myself, there is a big shift that has to happen
Mm.
for you. It is not easy, and it can be harder for some. All of a sudden, you go from being really good at executing and doing certain work to not doing that and having to think completely differently. And so um, the reason I started this company is realizing that like I want to help guide people that are in that transition,
Mm.
moving from an individual contributor role into a people manager role, and then take people that have been in leadership maybe for a little while but are struggling.
Mm.
They're struggling to have an engaged team. They're struggling to hire the right people and to create the culture that they want to create or the culture that's necessary to run a really
Mm.
successful team. I think there's a lot of leaders out there that have been doing it for years, and it still feels like a
Mhm.
struggle. It still feels really hard, and that's because it is.
Mhm.
And so to help people and help guide them through some of that, really, the way I think about it is all comes back to mindset
Mm.
and the beliefs that you have and what you think is important.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of leaders think certain things are important that aren't as important as others. And I have my own very strong opinions about what I think is important, but it's because I've experienced it. I've shifted my mindset and seen a massive difference
Right.
in how a team performs when I prioritize other things
Mm.
other than like an example is if we prioritize revenue and customers always, and this is pretty standard, over our people, it's going to be an uphill battle.
Yeah.
If we prioritize our people first, revenue and customers will come right along behind them very strong. And I think as leaders, if we understand that and realize that and start building a culture around that, we'll see our teams turn around.
I've heard several folks that are in leadership development work really hit that same point, and I keep wondering why we haven't more broadly learned that yet, why that is not the new status quo. I hear people have the language, but still a lot of work to be done. So there's definite opportunity out there because I just continue to see it again and again. We haven't quite figured that out yet.
Yeah. I think it's because there's all the external forces are telling us different, right? Like if we have shareholders, if we have a company that has shareholders, our shareholders want something very specific, and that is very important. But the thing is we can achieve that. We can achieve like that. That can still be a priority. And I think when companies realize that if you put your people first, you're going to see yourself hit those revenue targets. You're going to see these high performers. You're going to attract the right type of people to your company. They're going to want to work there because of how you treat them, which just makes you, more successful. And it's not something you can just turn on overnight, right? Like it's going to take time to build. But I think if more companies and more even individual teams would adopt that mindset, they would see it pay off.
Yeah. All right, let's go to Jonathan. Any book recommendations, podcast recommendations?
Yeah, so I've got a couple. There is a book, and I haven't read it in a while, but it was super impactful to the way I think. And it's called The Code of the Extraordinary Mind. I actually have it right here. I can show you the cover.
Ooh, I have not read this.
This is it. You can see I got a lot of bookmarks. So one of the things about this book, so this goes back to beliefs. And I think, you're talking about potential, we're talking about goals, we're talking about introducing habits into our life. I think one of the foundational pieces to all of that is what we believe, because our beliefs, that's why we do what we do or not do. Right. And there's so many different beliefs. They're built up over time from either how our parents taught us, what we learned from friends, what we learned at work. All these experiences build up beliefs that we have about the world around us, right? And so one of the things this book does is it really teaches you how to question those beliefs. And some of them are so deeply rooted inside of you that you don't even know you have them. And so really figuring out how to dig deep and understand, what beliefs do I have? Are they serving me well? And if they're not, maybe I can change them. Maybe I can change my belief in that. So, and when you talk about potential, there's that voice in your head that says, this is who I am. I fit in this box. This is how I identify, as far as what my potential is. And if you can change that narrative inside your head, your potential all of a sudden goes up. That potential you always had, but it starts to, you start to believe it for yourself, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so another book. This is and you can see I've got marks in this one too.
I love the tabs.
So I am I love Stoic philosophy. So Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, and this is his it's called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. This is basically his journal. And so just so many great lessons in here, life lessons and things to think about, how to think about the world around you, how to operate in it. And that's one of those books you don't have to read it cover to cover. You can, just open up to a section and start reading. So, lastly, the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. So this is not written by him. It's written by Eric Jorgensen. But if you've ever heard of Naval or seen any of his interviews, or he used to do a lot of writing. I think he still does some, but you don't see him as much publicly anymore. Super wise person, and just a lot of good lessons and teaching, really about wealth, happiness, and stuff like that. So those are my three.
Okay. Any podcasts or any other recommendations for our listeners?
I feel like I'm always discovering new podcasts that I like. There are some that I keep coming back to. So one, I would say probably the one I've listened to the longest that I'm going to tell you today is The School of Greatness, which is Lewis Howe's podcast. He's been doing it for years, and he brings guests on, he interviews them, and just a lot of really interesting learnings from his podcast. I'll name two more. The Diary of the CEO by Stephen Bartlett. I just started listening to that in the last couple months, and again, just really interesting guests that he brings on. And if you know about Stephen, he's on, I think it's called Shark Tank, but it's in the UK. He's a super interesting guy. He's doing a lot of really cool things. So it's definitely worth a listen or watch on YouTube as well. And then Lex Friedman, I just love his style. He's so chill on his podcast, but he, again, has really good guests, some really big name guests on his podcast. So those are my three.
Oh, okay. So we'll put all the links to all that stuff in the episode description. And then, Jonathan, where can people find you and maybe get in touch with you on the things your company's doing and all of that?
Yeah, so easiest way, best way to get in touch with me is on LinkedIn. So I've got if LinkedIn.com/ I think it's IN/Jonathan Butterworth.
Wonderful.
So that's the best way.
Okay, Jonathan.
Shoot me a DM.
Yes, I'll find you on the LinkedIns. Jonathan, thank you so much for this time, for your insights, for connecting and just sharing openly about habits and potential and all of these things. I'm so excited to just stay connected and be entrepreneurial friends and just watch your business continue to grow. So thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening to the Building Thinkers podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a podcast rating and review. That helps more listeners find us in the world of podcasting algorithms. You can find out more about my learning and development strategy services at buildingthinkers.com. And remember, there's no limit to what you can learn.